What if Gladys Knight and the Pips played Southern rock? This week I'll be taking a moment to appreciate the incredible career of the Empress of Soul and her fantastic backing band, and also taking a little look at the Southern rock genre. What is it? Is it really a thing? And does it need to be? All this and more on this week's What If, How, When, Why. Hi, I'm Morgan Brown, and every Monday I upload a new What If video to my YouTube channel, and then on Wednesdays follow it up with one of these companion videos where I discuss the artists and genres involved in that video, and also share a little bit of my process. So the idea of the What If videos is that every week I pick a popular song and imagine an alternative universe in which some change of circumstances causes that song to come out completely different from the version we know and love. I then take the original lead vocal of that song and record a new backing track to it using just GarageBand and whatever instruments I happen to have to hand in order to bring that alternative version of the song to life. So the song I picked this week was Midnight Train to Georgia by Gladys Knight and the Pips, and I tried to reimagine that as a southern rock track. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that yet, here's a little taster.
So we burned down his hopes, and even sold his old car. Bought a one-way ticket back to the life he once knew. Oh yes he did, he said he would. I was leaving on that midnight train to Georgia. Yeah. Said he's going back to find, ooh, a simpler place and time. Oh, yeah.
Now, it's nice to get to have a little look at Gladys Knight this week, because I've been a fan for a long time, ever since, I think as a small child, Midnight Train to Georgia came on TV, and my dad started waxing lyrical about it, as well as dancing along with all the Pips moves, the little choo-choo bit. So that was my introduction to her, but then I started collecting Motown Chartbusters albums and heard some of her earlier material on that too. I've always really loved her, but it feels like even though she's definitely had a massive legendary career, she never seems to be quite mentioned in as exalted terms as some of her contemporaries like Aretha Franklin, or even some of her former Motown label mates like Diana Ross. Doesn't often seem to be afforded quite such legendary status, which I don't think is fair at all, because she's a spectacular singer with an incredible career. Her career as a singer goes all the way back to, I think, 1952, when the Pips were originally formed. I think she was 8 at the time. The Pips are a family group. It's Gladys, her brother, and 2 cousins, and started out very much in the mode of R&B vocal groups of the time, that sort of pre-rock and roll doo-wop R&B sound. Carried on through the 50s before eventually landing a recording deal at the turn of the decade, and their first single, I think, came out in 1961, Every Beat of My Heart, which is a fantastic record. I think they recorded a couple of versions of it, both great, but yeah, just a lovely example of that sort of old school R&B vocal group harmony. I think just after that first single came out, they decided that Gladys, who by then was 17 years old, was the obvious star of the show, so she was given star billing, and it became Gladys Knight and the Pips. And eventually, I think in 1966, they were signed to the Motown label. And they recorded and released a lot of stuff for Motown, a lot of it really great too. Had a few decent hits on there too. Notably, they had the original hit with Heard It Through the Grapevine before Marvin Gaye recorded his own version. So they did a ton of good work with that label, as I say, starting in 66, all the way through into the new decade. It was somehow, despite the consistent quality of their output and this kind of regular stream of modestly sized hits with the occasional runaway success, they never quite seem to be considered in the top tier of Motown acts. They were definitely a reliable band, but they weren't up there with the Diana Ross, Four Tops, Stevie Wonder kind of level of Motown acts, and it didn't seem to get quite that level of consideration from the label. And when it came time to negotiate a new contract with them in 1973, they were hoping to get a bit of a better deal, but I think given their standing with the label, that wasn't forthcoming, so they got a better offer from Buddha Records that sort of made the jump, which actually turned out to be a really good move for them. Pretty soon after that, they scored the big hit with Midnight Train to Georgia, and had a run of very, very successful albums and singles following on from that too. It's funny, Midnight Train to Georgia, I always just assumed that it had been written specifically for them. It seems so perfect for the group, both musically in terms of the way it fits their voices, and also in terms of, the setting, them being from Atlanta, Georgia originally, and it just seemed absolutely tailor-made for them. I never realised that it had originally been written by Jim Weatherly as Midnight Plane to Houston, and then the change to Train to Georgia had been made not for Gladys Knight but for Cissy Houston, Whitney's mother, who actually had the original hit with it. Yeah, it blew my mind when I found that out, because it just seemed like the absolutely perfect vehicle for Gladys and the Pips. But there you go. So I had a really good run through the 70s. I think towards the end of the decade there was some contract shenanigans going on, and there was some reason why they weren't able to record while they were still in various legal wranglings, so they had to pause Gladys and the Pips activities, and Gladys Knight then released her first solo records once they managed to get their contractual stuff sorted out, and came back with a new label in the 80s and carried on again all the way through the 80s, with Gladys doing the occasional solo bit in tandem, before finally the group split at the end of the decade, which was just an incredible run. Like with a lot of 60s and 70s soul greats, I don't know if the 80s material stands up quite so well. I've only ever really listened to odd bits on compilations, but as a group they still sounded fantastic. And also, just as a singer on her own, Gladys Knight was still in tremendous form. You only have to listen to her Bond theme License to Kill to hear what terrific form she was still on by that point in her career. I mean, not one of the strongest Bond films, but I think one of the stronger Bond themes of the latter day kind of post-Roger Moore era. So yeah, I haven't got that much more to say on Gladys and the Pips, really. I just think they were fantastic acts. Gladys Knight is one of the greatest singers ever recorded, absolutely deserves her title of the Empress of Soul, and certainly deserves to be mentioned in every bit as exalted terms as all the other greats of that era, because she really was something absolutely special. As I say, although they initially became famous through the Detroit-based Motown label, Gladys Knight and the Pips did originally emerge from Atlanta, Georgia, which makes them part of a very long tradition of great musicians coming from the American South. Indeed, you could argue that all American popular music, and thus sort of pretty much all modern pop to some extent, has roots in the South there. So it's always been really rich musical territory, obviously going back to the horrors of slavery, but then that musical fusion that occurred when musical styles and traditions that had been brought over from Africa collided with assorted different European traditions, and new forms emerged. So, very long musical lineage in the American South, and there's a strong argument to be made that all of those main strands of American popular music, blues, jazz, country, soul, all come from that single geographical area. So bearing that in mind, so it's interesting to think of that when considering the case of Southern rock. I believe Duane Allman, who's considered by most people to be one of the founders of Southern rock, himself wasn't keen on that genre tag, and basically voiced the opinion that all rock has its roots in the South, so you might as well just call it rock. So does he have a point? I guess what we know as Southern rock started to emerge towards the end of the 1960s, with bands like the Allman Brothers, followed in due course by notably Lynyrd Skynyrd, and then a whole swathe of other bands who all emerged from the southern states, and all basically playing a rootsy form of rock music that incorporated strong elements of different southern styles. So be that blues or country, soul or jazz, all of those or some of those to different extents would be incorporated in this guitar-based rock format. And you definitely can hear certain musical traits that appear in most southern rock bands, notably obviously the twang to the vocals, that regional accent, although there are numerous different southern accents in the States, I'm well aware. Generally a fair amount of bluesy grittiness, quite often a certain amount of country twang in there too. But other than that, those bands do diverge quite a lot musically. I mean, like the Allman Brothers, more so than a lot of those other bands, pretty progressive musically. A lot of their stuff's built on these quite elaborate extended instrumentals. There's like a strong element of jazz that creeps into a bunch of stuff, which you don't really hear in quite so many of the other southern rock bands. You get some bands who put on something that's more like a sort of soul review. You get some bands like the Charlie Daniels band, who are generally considered to be a southern rock band, lean very heavily into the country side of things. Some bands that just feel a bit more like a straight ahead rock band with a bit of a southern accent. So aside from just a fairly vague idea of a southern sounding rootsiness, it wasn't always all that much of a unifying thread between the different bands who were grouped together in this genre. I think the waters of like defining Southern rock are further muddied by the fact that around the same time there are a bunch of other bands who had pretty much all of the musical elements that you'd consider to be part of the makeup of Southern rock, but simply weren't from the South. So, you know, people like Creedence Clearwater Revival or The Band, even bits of like the early Eagles stuff, all very much sort of cross into the territory that people consider to be Southern rock in terms of just the actual music they were making. But you could never consider it to be Southern rock because they're just not from there. So you could argue it's a genre based more on locality than on musical identity, which, as I was discussing the other week when I was talking about Britpop, isn't always a particularly satisfactory way of categorising things for me. And as I say, at least some of the performers felt the same way about it. They didn't really want to have their music categorised just based on where they came from. But I guess for some performers who did embrace the term, and for some fans, Southern rock music kind of becomes a badge of regional identity, a kind of celebration, Southern cultural identity, which, you know, can be both a good and a bad thing. There's definitely an awful lot about the American South that is worth celebrating. As I say, it's got pretty much the richest popular musical heritage of anywhere on the planet. But as I say, there are some dark origins to that heritage too. So I think celebrating that without also acknowledging where it comes from is always a risky business. I don't know if anyone has done any reevaluating of this in more recent years, but I certainly remember seeing footage of Leonard Skinner from the early 70s with them playing in front of a Confederate flag banner. And for me, there's no positive spin you can put on that. I know there are plenty of people who will say that outsiders don't understand what that flag means to them and that it's an essential part of their identity, but I don't buy it really. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is the southern states of the US have absolutely produced some unbelievable music, and the best of southern rock combines a bunch of those different elements in a really satisfying way. And I have no problem with a genre that celebrates that heritage, as long as in celebrating the good sides of that heritage you're also prepared to acknowledge and kind of grapple with some of the darker or more complicated sides as well. But anyway, that takes me up to this week's alternative universe scenario. So in my alternate timeline this week, it's 1973, Gladys and the Pips at the point of renegotiating their contract with Motown, and the negotiations aren't going well. They're feeling a bit fed up of being treated as a bit of a second-class act on the label. So rather than sign this disappointing deal they're being offered, they decide to take some time out and figure out what their next step's going to be. So they pack up, they depart from the label's office in Los Angeles and head back to their hometown of Atlanta, Georgia. And when they get there, Gladys immediately notices that there's a bit of a buzz around this new scene that's taking over the airwaves, this new style of music that at first just sounds like straight ahead white boy rock, but actually the closer you listen to it, the more you can hear these elements of blues and country and soul and jazz and even hints of gospel that can creep into it. And she's very excited by this sound and feels like this could be the new identity that turns around the Pips' fortunes. So she takes it back to the boys. They all agree this is the way to go. So they recruit a new backing band, all long-haired guitar slingers, to help them to realise this new sound. And then the final puzzle piece falls into place when they hear Cissy Houston's recording of Midnight Train to Georgia, and it just seems to so perfectly encapsulate their own experience that they decide that's got to be the song with which they launch this new version of Gladys Knight and the Pips. So their decision has proved to be correct. Their version of Midnight Train to Georgia is a massive hit, and they achieve a previously unknown level of global stardom with their uniquely soulful take on the southern rock sound. So, in attempting to turn Midnight Train to Georgia into a southern rock song, my first step as ever is just getting the original vocal track into GarageBand, syncing it up to the grid, and setting the tempo. I decided I wanted it to be a little more up-tempo than the original. The original's quite melancholy, fairly stately. I wanted to give it a bit more of a Sweet Home Alabama by Leonard Skinner kind of feel. So just nudged it up slightly on the tempo. That done, next step was just programming some drums in. Nothing too fancy, fairly meat and potatoes, few cool little fills. Same with the bass, which I put on next. Pretty solid workman-like bass, just holding down a nice kind of steady groove underneath everything, but not going out of its way to draw too much attention to itself. Next step was guitars, so I think I ended up with 4 guitar tracks. I've got 2 rhythm tracks, just panned left and right, as I tend to do with these things, with a sound that's not heavy rock distortion, it's just slightly broken up, very mild overdrive, a bit like, again, a Leonard Skinner kind of tone. That's the sort of feel I was going for. So I've got these 2 rhythm guitars twanging away, playing more or less the same things, but with a couple of different chord voicings. I used the capo on one of them to get nice ringy open chords. I should say as well, I made a couple of tweaks to the actual underlying harmony of the song to make it sound a bit more southern rock, a bit more kind of country. So I've got those rhythm tracks on there, twanging away. Wanted a couple of different leads on there. I've got one regular lead guitar, fretted, bit more of an overdriven sound. Popped a phaser on it as well, which is a kind of classic 70s rock tone. Also used in country around that time a bit. I mean, thinking of Waylon Jennings and the like, so I thought that was a good sound to go for. And that's just playing little fills, going for a style that's a bit bluesy, a little bit country, a few kind of little pedal steel bends and things in there. And then for my second lead guitar, I tried a bit of slide, because that's another kind of classic southern rock thing, particularly thinking of the Allman Brothers. Duane Allman, obviously legendary slide guitar player, so I'm no Duane Allman, I'm pretty terrible at slide guitar, but I gave it my best shot. I think I've got the fretted lead guitar mainly in the first verse and the slide in the second verse, and then I've got them alternating after that. And then I just wanted to fill the sound out a bit more with some keyboards, so started off with some piano, plunking away a bit boogie, a bit barrel house. I'm a pretty terrible pianist, so I recorded it very slow and then took it up the tempo and did a lot of tidying up to make my terrible playing sound semi-competent at least. So that's plunking away on one side, and then over on the other side we've got a bit of a Hammond B3 organ kind of sound as well, just to give a little bit of a soul gospel hint to the sound as well, which I thought goes really nicely with the feel of Gladys and the Pips vocals. And then for the video, as ever, started out by finding some footage of Gladys and the Pips performing the song back in the 1970s from some TV show, got that synced up to my track. And then obviously they're just performing as vocalists, so I wanted a backing band to make it feel like a proper southern rock band, so went straight to some footage of the Allman Brothers. I think most of it's actually from a 1980 concert, but you know, it still kind of looks the part. So I edited that in between the vocals, and then just to place Gladys Knight and the Pips a bit more in that scene, I also mocked up a few concert posters. So I took the Gladys Knight and the Pips logo and just inserted it into some bills of southern rock type acts, just to suggest that they were an important part of that scene back in the 70s as well. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I've been vaguely thinking of attempting something with southern rock for a while, couldn't think who to do that with, and then just heard Midnight Train to Georgia somewhere for the first time in a couple of years and thought, oh yeah, that's the one. Could immediately hear how it ought to go. So hopefully I managed to realise that okay, and hopefully some of you will enjoy it. If you did enjoy it, you can let me know down in the comments, and if you could like, share, subscribe, all that stuff really helps the channel. I always really appreciate it. If there's anything else you'd like me to do in coming weeks and months, any artists or songs or genres you'd like me to take a look at, do let me know. Your suggestions are always most welcome. But otherwise, that's all from me for this week, so thanks very much indeed for watching, and I'll hope to see you next time.